Hi folks, I'm Tim. A while back someone asked whether I would make a video about my large format view cameras to kind of explain what they are and why I use them. At first I declined because I'm not really a video maker and there's plenty of large format videos out there already. But then I looked around a little and I saw that most of them are either aimed at folks who've already taken the plunge and need some detailed instruction, or they just show someone shooting with a view camera and don't really explain much about what's going on. So I thought there might be a little bit of a gap I could plug into there and help some folks out. Now I'm not going to try to convince you should be a large format photographer. I've shot everything from 35mm to medium format to large format over the years, and was also an early adopter of digital for commercial and fine artwork. So I definitely believe in using the tool that gets the job done for you. However, I do think there's a potential role for large format in the toolbox of a lot of photographers who've never really looked into it, partly because of the intimidation factor, but also there's some real barriers to entry there that can be difficult to get past. So hopefully I can answer a few questions and give you the opportunity to see if there's something you want to look into a little bit more deeply. Now I know these big cameras are the intriguing piece here, and everyone wants to get a close-up look right off the bat. But they say if you want to inspire someone, you should start with the why rather than the what. So I'm going to work a little bit backwards here. First I'm going to talk about the image making experience with large format, and then some about the hands-on process of using a view camera. After that, I'll talk about what I think is the biggest technical reason for using a view camera and the advantages that they have over fixed lens cameras. And then finally, I'll open up my 10x10 and let you take a look under the hood, see how it works, and really understand what a view camera is. Now, there's obviously a lot of detail that I can't cover in a short video here, but if you stick around to the end, I'll also point you towards some of my favorite resources for digging a little deeper. Okay, so let's talk about the why. When I go out with a DSLR and a memory card that holds 1,000 exposures, I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store. Something catches my eye, I'll grab 3 or 4 shots. Something else will catch my eye, I'll grab 3 or 4 shots there, and I just want to keep moving on. And to some degree, I experienced that same thing when shooting medium format with only 12 exposures on a roll of film. Now that doesn't mean I'm sloppy about shooting or that I don't make intentional photographs, but it does mean that I don't spend a whole lot of time examining each subject, considering the possible perspectives of presentation, and really thinking about what I want to say in that photograph. It kind of lacks an intimate connection with the subject that, for me, I like to have as part of an image making experience. So when I go out and shoot with a view camera, it forces me out of that. It gives me time to select the subject and perspective thoughtfully, really think about what I want to say in that photograph. And it gives me a chance to experience the subject rather than just capture it. So for me, that leads to more meaningful photographs. And consider that I can go out with any camera I own really and come back with 6 or 8 pretty good keepers on any given day. With DSLR, I'll also come back with 300 or 400 that just didn't quite make the cut. With the view camera, I'll come back with 3 or 4 that didn't quite make the cut. So my proportion of successful images is much, much higher with shooting a view camera. In addition to that, for every keeper I shoot with the DSLR, I've shot several dozen throwaways that I spent just as much time on. So the memories of shooting those keepers kind of blurs together with all the throwaways when shooting with the DSLR. I have pretty well composed pictures, but not much of the experience that goes along with them. When I'm shooting with a view camera, I can sit down a month, a year, sometimes even a decade later and still write a story about every one of those keepers. So it's a much more memorable experience, much better connection with the subject, and that photograph is designed to really capture the essence of that experience with that subject. Now what enables that experience is the hands-on process of shooting with a view camera. When I shoot with my DSLR, I make a decision about framing and then I push the shutter button halfway down and the computer takes over. It focuses the lens, it evaluates the light, it gives me thought-free sideboards on setting the aperture and shutter speed. Maybe it sets an ISO, maybe it applies an exposure adjustment. And then I press the shutter release the rest of the way down and the mirror lifts, the shutter trips, the mirror drops, and the shutter decocks. In the meantime, while the data is being transferred to the memory card, the computer is applying contrast enhancements and color corrections based on algorithms that are stored inside. If I disagree with the choices made by the computer, I can override some of them, but even then the actions are filtered through rules and judgments built into algorithms. Afterwards, I display the image on a screen as a virtual representation of the image and apply additional algorithms to make it look however I think it should. Overall, it's an invisible, ethereal process with no physical substance to it. When I shoot with a view camera, all those same steps happen more or less in some fashion or another. However, at each step, I'm the one who makes a conscious, intentional decision. I physically perform an action to implement that decision. If I pause or get stuck, no computer takes over and tells me what to do next. And in the end, I have a physical object in my hands, and I know the quality of that depends on how well I performed every step along the way. It's a manual, tactile, sensual process that I just don't get when shooting with a DSLR. Now, don't think I'm opposed to digital photography. I do shoot digital for much of my work, and I have done so for nearly 18 years. But there's no denying the process of shooting with a view camera is much more human-controlled, human-dependent, and for me, it's a more personal, more intimate, more fulfilling avenue for creating imagery. I'm conducting the process rather than just causing it to happen, and once you get used to that, it's pretty impossible not to appreciate it. Okay, so now that we've talked about the image making experience and the hands-on process of shooting with a view camera, let's talk a little bit about some of the technical reasons for shooting a large format view camera. Now, there's a number of technical arguments to be made for it depending on specific situations, but I just want to focus on one, which is the ability to apply camera movements to a view camera. That gives you tools to solve three major categories of image making problems that you really can't solve with a fixed lens camera. I'm going to quickly step through each of those just to help you understand. So first off, the categories of problems, I guess, are framing problems, focal plane or depth of field problems, and perspective problems. So let's start to talk first about framing problems. When you shoot with a fixed lens camera, your lens is centered on your sensor or your film. So even though the lens casts a larger image circle than your sensor, you don't have any ability to capture any piece of that image circle except for the center. They're locked in place. You don't have any ability to adjust it and move the lens around so that different parts of that image circle are accessible. With a view camera, your lens casts an image circle that's larger than your sensor, and some lenses cast larger circles than others. And you can move, without moving your sensor, you can move your lens up, down, also left and right. And that allows you to access different parts of that image circle and reframe your portion that your sensor captures without moving the camera. Now, why is that an advantage? If you want to reframe your image because your tripod's not tall enough, or the light changed, or something moved in the scene, whatever reason, with a fixed lens camera, you have to physically move the camera. Maybe not a big deal if you're shooting in an open area, handheld. It becomes a little bit more cumbersome if you're on a tripod. If you're in a confined space, or say inside a building, or shooting in a forest where trees limit where you can move around, it may be impossible to move to the place you need to get without just by physically moving the camera. So with the view camera, you have the ability to reframe and capture other parts of that image circle without moving the camera around. So that's one advantage you get with the view camera. Second category of problems are focal plane or depth of field problems. With a fixed lens camera, Your focal plane of your lens is always parallel to the focal plane of your sensor, and you can't change that. There's no option for the photographer to change those two. What that means is that the plane of sharpest focus out here is also parallel to those two. Object at the same distance is in sharp focus, and objects that are nearer or farther from you are less sharp than that one plane of sharpest focus. You can compensate for that to some degree by adjusting to a smaller aperture so your depth of field grows, but there's limitations to that, and it also has drawbacks of dealing with longer exposure times, for example. Why is that a problem? Well, if you say you're shooting a landscape and you want to have the foreground and the background both in sharp focus, your plane of sharpest focus is always the same distance from you. You can't make it cover the foreground and the background at the same time. With a view camera, without moving your sensor plane, you can tilt your lens plane up or down, or left or right, swing it left or right, so that now your plane of sharpest focus is nearer to the film plane in one part of the image and farther from the film plane in another part of the image. That allows you, with a relatively large aperture, to have your foreground and your background in sharp focus. Conversely, if you want to shoot two subjects that are the same distance from you, say two people standing side by side, with your fixed, and have one of them be in sharp focus and one of them not in sharp focus, then with your fixed lens camera, your only option is to skew the camera so you're introducing strange perspectives into the image, in addition to changing your plane of focus. And really, you're not changing your plane of focus either, you're just skewing the perspective of the image. With a view camera, you can swing your lens left or right, depending on the nature of the problem you're trying to address. And so now your plane of sharpest focus is nearer to the film in one location than it is on another. So you can have two objects at equal distance from you be at different states of sharpness in the image. So that's the second category of problems you can solve with a view camera that you can't really solve with a fixed lens camera. The third category are perspective problems. The classic example of this is shooting a building, where if you want to get the whole building, you have to get down low and tilt your camera up. And the result is that your building either looks like it's falling over backwards, or it's getting narrower on the sides and it's not as wide at the top as it is at the bottom. And the reason for that is because you have different magnification factors. Things at the same horizontal distance from you are no longer the same horizontal distance from your film plane. So the magnification is different at the top and bottom of the image. With a view camera, you can still set it down low, tilt your camera to capture the whole subject, but then you can readjust your film plane so it's again parallel to the face of the building. Make a corresponding adjustment in your lens plane, and now the level of magnification at the top and bottom of the image is the same, so your building looks square, same width at the top and the bottom, and it doesn't look like it's falling over backwards. Now that's, like I said, the building is the classic example of that, but the same problem occurs with other objects that are tall, like trees or mountains, with objects that are long, like fences or rows of people standing side by side, with subjects that have different elevations, like someone standing on a staircase or a bridge above you, or with subjects that require really wide field of view, like photographing the interior of a building. All of those can introduce or require introducing distortions with a fixed lens camera that are relatively easy to take out by applying camera movements on a view camera. So just to recap those, with a view camera you can solve framing problems, depth of field or focal plane problems, and perspective problems that just can't be solved with a fixed lens camera. And to me, that's really the core technical reason to shoot with view cameras. It allows you to solve image making problems that can't be solved with other types of cameras. Okay, so now let's take a look at the part that probably everybody's been waiting for, how a view camera is put together and how they operate. At the very basic level, a view camera is nothing but a box that can be made longer and shorter. There's various mechanisms for doing that. Some are on a rail, like the one you've seen over here. Most what are called field cameras have an extensible bed similar to this, so you can turn a knob. They have coarse adjustments that you can make large adjustments and fine adjustments for finer focusing. So different mechanisms for different cameras, but essentially they're all a box that can be made longer or shorter. The ends on that box are called standards, and they have to have some way to stand up and be stiff. Again, there's different mechanisms for that. And they have the mechanism for, as I talked about earlier, moving up and down, swinging left and right, etc. So the standard on its own can move the end of the box. And on some cameras, as I said, the back can also move up and down, left and right. This one does not have what's called rise and fall or shift on the rear of the camera. So once you have the box that you can make longer and shorter, you have to have a middle to make it dark. Almost all modern cameras and not so modern cameras use an extensible or extendable bellows in the middle. There are different designs. There's sliding box cameras that use a different design to get longer and shorter, but essentially almost all cameras you're gonna encounter will use an extendable bellows in the middle so that you can make the box longer and shorter. And keep it dark in the middle at the same time. Fairly simple. Nothing in the middle except the hole. Now, the front standard has the ability to accept the lens panel with a lens and secure it in place. And the rear panel has the ability to accept some sort of frosted glass window that will catch the light cast by the lens so it forms an image you can see. And it has some way to move out of the way so you can replace that glass with film at the same location. And that's it. That's what a view camera consists of. It's basically a box with a lens on one end and a window on the other that you can make longer and shorter. So there's nothing complicated about learning how it operates. Essentially, the steps for operating it are you first open the preview or open the aperture with a preview shut. Preview button that lets light come through the lens so that it will cast an image on the window in the back, and you can see that to make the camera longer or shorter while you're focusing. Once you get the focus where you want, and you'll see people with a cloth draped over their head. That's to make it dark so you can see that image better. That's all it is. There's no magic going on under the cloth. It's just a shade. So you make the camera longer or shorter to get the focus where you want. Once you've got it focused, you're going to go back and close the preview so there's no longer light coming through the lens. Then take your meter reading, set your aperture and shutter speed to your desired reading. Then you're going to slide a film holder in back here so that the film is in the same location, the same distance from the lens that the glass was when you focus the image. So your film holder will slide in here. I should have brought a film holder. Then the film holder has a dark slide that slides out so the film is uncovered. Then you trip the shutter. Now you've exposed your film, you put the dark slide back in, and you can pull out the film holder. And that's the process of taking a picture. Now, so obviously there's a lot of other details that can go into it depending on the situation. Applying your camera movements, using filters in front of the lens, etc. But ultimately those are the steps that happen for every photograph. You open the lens, focus the image on the window, close the lens, replace the window with film, trip your shutter, and you recover the film and you've made your exposure. So pretty simple. That's what a view camera is. That's how they operate. So I think that pretty much covers it. I'm not going to add a lot more to this. I did tell you at the beginning that if you stuck around till the end, I would point you towards some of my favorite resources for learning about large format photography in case you want to dig a little bit deeper. One of those is obviously searching on YouTube. There's some really good folks out there making videos, much better quality, much better organized than my videos. Just do a search and you'll find them, but I think you'll find folks like Matt Marash and Ben Horn will really give you the guts of what you need to get into learning more about large format photography. The second that I recommend is picking up a good book on the subject. And one of my favorites is called Using the View Camera by Steve Simmons. It's well written, clear. I've had this copy for years. Definitely recommend it if you want to get into large format photography, picking up a copy of this. There's other good ones out there too. I'll put a link to a few in the comments below. Most of them are out of print. Unfortunately, there's just not enough demand to keep them going anymore, but they are relatively easy to find used, so they're accessible out there. And finally, the last resource I recommend is doing an online search for largeformatphotography.info. There's an enormous amount of information collected there. You could read for a lifetime. And there's also a really great forum on there that you can get in, see some discussions, see examples of people's work with large format, get answers to questions. So definitely check out YouTube, pick up a book on the subject, and look up the online forums if you really want to start learning more about large format photography. So that's pretty much wraps it up, and I think we're going to call it quits there. Thanks.